and critical literature review offsetting a minor methodological flaw, and then come to an overall grade and mark for it. And then I'd typically write up a pro forma which talked about the dissertation sort of going through the various phases and the introduction, and then the sort of literature review and stuff, and talking about each one. And then what I would almost always do when I finished one is I would then write overall comments, so saying, taking all these together, this suggests that the dissertation as a whole is, shows reasonably good knowledge and understanding, or it's outstanding, or it's excellent, or whatever.
Yeah. And so, do you work through kind of methodically, right, I'll start at page 1 and I'll work through to the end and make notes as I go along, or some people start with a bibliography and then go back to the intro and
I would always start at the beginning, and I would always read it cover to cover and make notes on the way. Now, when I got later on in the dissertation, so once I've been through it and I was kind of thinking about the results, I might think to myself, oh well, they didn't really talk about this, and I might then go back and check whether they actually looked at literature surrounding it. So I might then flip backwards and forwards, but I'd always kind of go through it.
Yeah. And does the mark kind of build as you go through? Because you're talking about, right, okay, I've looked at the literature, maybe bits are missing here, or there's evidence of compare and contrast here and so on, and then the method, is it the right method used, etc., etc. Does the mark build as you go along, or do you kind of get to the end and think, right, okay, I think this is a certain banding, and then I'm going to go back and check, or how does it work?
I think there's always an element of you starting to form a view about something as you read it, and that's human nature. But I think one thing that I probably am more aware of now is not to pigeonhole something absolutely until I've got to the end, because that's what I would do when I look back through my notes and try and balance things off and look at the work as a whole, and how that fits into the grade descriptors. So I try and make sure that I don't consciously pigeonhole it too much, because I can think of dissertations in the past that I've read which have had, I won't say a scant literature review, but one that could have been much better written, much better presented, but then have gone on and collected some highly original data, done something with really good methodology and got some really interesting results and analysed them. And if I'd have kind of been doing it in a too much of an additive way, I may have pigeonholed it too early. So I try and force myself to make some notes and then go back and then sit and synthesise.
How easy is it to kind of balance these out? Because I know in a previous institution I worked at, when we were marking dissertations, the marking scheme was structured. So you had 10 marks for the intro, 30 marks for the lit review, 30 marks for the, and so on like that. Well, obviously we don't have that here. We have right here as a dissertation, and you could have a good literature review or a bad one, and it could be rescued through the method and the analysis. And so how easy is it to kind of balance those things out to come to a mark?
Well, not having a structured pro forma on the face of it makes that more challenging. I think one of the reasons why,
I'm not saying that's a good thing or a bad thing, by the
way. But I think that when I think about how I would assess this, does it make it more challenging? I think it means that you need to do what I was saying earlier, that I need to force myself to actually think of what's in each chapter and balance this off. However, I think in some respects it would be more challenging with a structured pro forma when students can do a variety of different types of dissertation. So one of the things that I think I would find more challenging with a structured pro forma, if students, say, doing finance dissertations, and you have one student who's done a case study approach of mergers and acquisitions, which is, as you know, is a fairly common thing. Take two mergers and acquisitions, do a fairly sort of qualitative analysis on it,
Yeah.
and you have another student who's decided that they want to investigate cross-border M&A in the pharmaceutical industry, and using a model, they collect data from Thomson 1, they get event dates, and they do an event study, and it's a highly quantitative piece of work. I think to have one pro forma would make it more challenging, because I wouldn't expect that the methodology sections for the two would be perhaps of the same length and depth. So I think in some sense it would make it easier if the dissertation was set up so all students should do this kind of chapter structure, and everyone's expected to do empirical work.
And of course not all students do that, some do more theoretical pieces.
Exactly, yeah. Or the case study type approach. Yeah. So it would make it easier if students were doing exactly the same type of dissertation. And I guess one of the processes of a pro forma is partly to provide feedback, but also to provide a robust QA mechanism. And so I can see why that would be beneficial. I am not sure, given the approach that I take, and I spend quite a bit of time marking dissertations, it would adjust the marks and the grades that I would give the dissertations.
Are you automatically doing some sort of balance anyway, do you think?
Well, I think inevitably you balance things off.
Yeah.
You balance things off in your head. That's bound to happen, and in a sense, what we're doing is arriving at an academic judgment. Yeah. So to arrive at an academic judgment, there needs to be application of cognitive function and balancing off in your head. Yeah. So that is bound to be the case. However, I can see that if you were looking at the same type of dissertation, that might be helpful.
Yeah. You mentioned a couple of times there grade descriptors. Would you be surprised to learn that your colleagues don't mention these things? Scratch that. Right? Well, but let me put it another way. Okay, so you talked about using the grade descriptors as part and parcel of doing the marking.
Yeah.
And so, both in the literature and anecdotally, you get a variety of views about how these things are actually used in practice. Okay. So you said that you actually, I mean, obviously you were chair of the examination board, so you have a very detailed understanding of what those grade descriptors are and were, and so you're actually applying them as you go. Do you think your colleagues do that?
I think it's probably not universal, and I think it also depends on experience. I mean, what I used to do when I marked huge numbers of exam scripts was, where I used to mark at home, I used to simply tape the grade descriptors to the wall next to my desk, and I used that as a consistency check as I went through.
Yeah.
I'd mark the scripts and then I'd think, does this answer show general understanding? Or does it fall into reasonably good? And I would be, these days, because I know kind of what's in them, I don't need to actually physically tape the sheet, but I do try and use this mentally to bin answers and scripts. Now, part of that is probably because I've been marking here for a long time, and it's also partly because I was the chair of the Board of Examiners. But to answer your question, I'm not extraordinarily surprised that not all colleagues would take the same approach. On the other hand, we do cover grade descriptors and assessment criteria at staff induction, so every member of staff has this discussed with them when they join. So I would expect that these would form a key part for the majority of colleagues.
You might forgive me because some of these questions overlap, and
I don't mind. So just ask me whatever you want.
What factors are especially important to you when you're marking?